A courtroom falls silent. A respected judge gasps. Across the bench stands a man in cuffs. Her childhood best friend. What she does next, nobody could have seen coming. This isn't just a trial, it's a moment that will change both of their lives forever. Stay tuned. You won't believe how this ends. It started like any ordinary morning in Judge Rebecca Thompson's courtroom. The steady hum of anticipation echoed through the polished wood-paneled room. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispered last-minute strategies to their clients, and court reporters checked their equipment. The bailiff stood poised near the entrance, the same as every other day. It was the kind of structured chaos Judge Thompson had grown used to over the years. Predictable, orderly, and under control. Rebecca, now in her 10th year on the bench, sat tall in her high-backed leather chair, her black robe neatly pressed, her hair pinned in its usual professional style. She reviewed the docket for the morning session, flipping through the printed pages with practiced precision. Theft, domestic dispute, possession, routine matters in the grand scheme of criminal court. She gavelled in the court at exactly 9 a.m. Case number 3278. The state of Georgia versus Marcus Bell, she announced. The words passed her lips without any pause. Just another name, another file. But as the double doors to the courtroom creaked open and the defendant stepped through, something inside her shifted. She glanced up briefly, more out of habit than interest, until her gaze met the figure walking toward the defendant's stand. He wore a standard-issue tan jumpsuit, the kind every detainee wore during arraignment. His wrists were shackled, and a faint clinking of metal echoed as he walked, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if the weight of the world pressed down on his shoulders. His beard was speckled with gray, and his posture seemed weathered by time and hardship. When he finally raised his head, their eyes locked, and everything stopped. Time. Sound. Thought. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She leaned slightly forward, her hands instinctively tightening on the bench. It was Marcus Bell, her childhood best friend. The boy who used to climb trees with her, race her down the block, and spend long afternoons lying in the grass talking about dreams and fears. The one who taught her how to ride a bike, who once gave her his lunch when she forgot hers and never asked for anything in return. They grew up on the same street in the heart of Atlanta, Elmwood Avenue, a neighborhood that knew struggle, but also warmth. Their families weren't wealthy, but they had each other. Marcus's laugh was unforgettable, loud, unapologetic, full of mischief. He was protective, kind, and bold, in a way she had always admired. As kids, they made secret pacts and built imaginary kingdoms from cardboard boxes. In high school, they drifted, but never truly lost their bond. Until the day she left for college, and he didn't. She remembered that last conversation clearly. They stood by the old train tracks that split the neighborhood in two. She had her acceptance letter clutched in one hand, and a suitcase in the other. He smiled for her, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Go get him, Becca," he said. "Don't look back." She promised she wouldn't. She never saw him again, not until now. Standing before her, hardened, older but unmistakably him, was the boy she once believed would do great things. The boy who now stood in chains in her courtroom, accused of a crime. The sound of whispers rose in the room. A defense attorney leaned over to his client, likely unaware of the moment unfolding at the bench. Cameras from the press clicked quietly from the back row, but Judge Thompson heard none of it. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. What happened to him, she thought. What brought him here? Her mind reeled. She knew the law. She understood protocol, but nothing in her training prepared her for this moment. Her childhood friend was now a defendant in her courtroom, and she was the one tasked with deciding his fate. Suddenly, the courtroom no longer felt routine. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't just another morning. This was something else entirely. Something personal. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing, and Rebecca Thompson, judge, jurist, and lifelong seeker of justice, was about to face a decision that would challenge everything she believed in. Rebecca struggled to keep her composure. Her face, calm and composed to the public eye, masked the emotional storm raging within. Years of judicial experience had taught her to maintain control, to separate emotion from judgment. But that training now felt like a paper shield in the face of something far more powerful. Memory. The prosecution's voice echoed through the chamber, methodically listing the charges against the man standing before her. Count 1, burglary. Count 2, breaking and entering with intent. Each word felt like a hammer blow, not to her authority, but to her heart. Burglary, breaking and entering. It didn't fit. Not with the Marcus Bell she knew, the Marcus who used to walk her home from school with her backpack slung over one shoulder and his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. The Marcus who once shared his last slice of pizza with a stray dog and told her, "If you've got enough to give, you should." He had always been that way. Rough around the edges, yes, but with a heart as wide as the Georgia sky. Now he stood before her in a beige jumpsuit, eyes dimmed, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying the weight of every bad choice, every missed opportunity. And all she could think of was the look on his face that day, all those years ago, when he watched his family being evicted from their home. They had only been 13. She remembered the police cars parked outside the Bell, residence lights spinning red and blue. Marcus had stood silently next to his mother, clutching a worn-out duffel bag. Tears had welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Rebecca, peeking from her front porch across the street, had wanted to run to him, to help, to say something, anything, but she didn't know how. Instead, she just watched as her best friend's world crumbled. They came from the same neighborhood, the same cracked sidewalks, the same corner store with the dusty candy shelf. But somewhere along the way, the road had forked. She remembered how hard her parents had worked to keep her focused. After-school programs, tutoring, curfews, a steady drumbeat of encouragement. Marcus hadn't had that. His mother worked double shifts, and his father had disappeared before either of them hit middle school. By the time they were 16, Marcus had already started drifting, cutting class, running with the wrong crowd. Still, she never saw him as anything but good. The courtroom faded as her thoughts took over. She saw them again. 10 years old, running through sprinklers in her front yard, laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. 14, dancing at their middle school spring formal, both awkward and unsure, clinging to each other in the corner of the gym. 17, sitting side by side on the swings at Lincoln Park, where he told her he didn't think he was going to graduate. And then that last moment at the train station. She had just turned 18, her bags packed for law school up north. He had come to see her off, his hands stuffed in his hoodie, trying to hide the pain in his eyes. "Make something of yourself, Becca," he'd said quietly. "You too," she replied. It's not too late. But it had been. For him. Or, at least it seemed that way now. He hadn't followed her. He'd stayed behind. Life, cruel and unrelenting, had swept him up in a tide of poverty, bad influences, and desperation. And now, years later, he stood shackled in front of her, bearing a number, not a name, in the eyes of the system. A flicker of guilt passed through her chest. Had she really made it out on her own? Or had she simply been given a bridge while he faced nothing but closed roads? The courtroom came back into focus. The prosecutor had finished reading the charges. She looked at Marcus again. Really looked. And for a moment, just a moment, she didn't see a defendant. She saw a boy who once dreamed of being a firefighter, a friend who believed in her before she ever believed in herself. And now she had to decide, would she be just a judge today, or something more? When Marcus finally looked up, their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. No murmurs from the gallery, no clacking of keys from the court reporter, no shuffling of legal pads. Just a frozen moment, suspended between past and present. Recognition dawned slowly on his face, like sunrise creeping across old, familiar terrain. His brows furrowed at first, then relaxed, and a whisper escaped his lips, barely audible but piercing. "Rebecca?" His voice carried the weight of years, years filled with what-ifs, maybes, and memories too painful to revisit. Her name, spoken not as a judge, not as Your Honor, but as a friend. His eyes glistened, the shackles on his wrists seeming heavier, now not just iron, but laden with regret. The bailiff, sensing a breach of decorum, took a step forward. Rebecca raised a hand. "It's okay," she said, her voice measured but gentle. "Let him speak." A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. The cameras zoomed in. The prosecutor's mouth tightened, but no one objected, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, Marcus took a breath. It trembled like the first breath after nearly drowning. "I didn't think you'd remember me," he began, voice low but clear. "Guess I look a little different now." A faint hollow chuckle followed, but it quickly faded. His shoulders slumped slightly, not in defeat but in surrender, to the truth, to memory, to her. "When you left," he said, "I was proud of you. Really proud. You were gonna make it. I always knew that. I remember telling my brother, that girl's gonna be a judge one day." He paused. "Guess I was right." Rebecca's hands, clenched slightly, hidden under the bench. "My mom got sick not long after," Marcus continued. "Had to take care of her and Malachi, my little brother. He was just a kid, but trouble found him early. We didn't have much. Rent got late, bills piled up. I started doing whatever I had to." He swallowed hard. "First it was dumb stuff. Shoplifting, tagging. Then bigger things. People I shouldn't have been around. Choices I wish I could take back." His voice cracked. "I kept thinking I could turn it around. But one bad step turned into 100. And somewhere along the way I stopped trying. I stopped believing I could." The room held its breath. I don't expect mercy, Marcus said, his gaze steady on hers. I just hoped you might understand. Not excuse me, not forget what I did, but maybe remember who I was, who I tried to be. The courtroom was utterly still. Even the prosecution, who had been preparing to rebut, seemed hesitant now, their notes forgotten. The cameras, the press, everyone seemed to collectively lean in, drawn not to a crime story, but a human one. Rebecca sat motionless, her face unreadable. But inside, her heart was warring with her mind. The law was clear. Evidence pointed to guilt. A sentence was expected. Justice, after all, could not be swayed by sentiment. And yet, what is justice without humanity? She remembered his mother's smile, the warm meals shared between their families. She remembered Marcus slipping comic books into her locker during exam week. She remembered the boy who once gave her his gloves in the dead of winter, because hers had holes. The gavel in front of her felt suddenly too heavy. She could see the outlines of two paths, one cold, clinical, detached. The other, murkier but rooted in something deeper, empathy. She looked down at the docket, then back at Marcus. What did the system gain from crushing a man who had already been broken? What did society lose when compassion was left out of the verdict? She inhaled slowly, the courtroom waiting on her next words like the last line of a prayer. Justice had to be served. But maybe, just maybe, so did grace. After hearing both the prosecution's arguments and the defense's quiet plea, Judge Rebecca Thompson sat still for a long moment. The tension in the courtroom was nearly tangible, every eye on her, every breath held in anticipation. But she needed time. Not just to review the legalities, but to make sense of the storm inside her chest. She cleared her throat, her voice steady, though her thoughts were anything but. This court will take a brief recess. With a tap of her gavel, she stood and exited through the side door, the bailiff escorting her silently. As the heavy door to her chambers closed behind her, the facade dropped, her shoulders slumped. Her breath came shallow. She paced. One hand pressed lightly against her temple, the other, trembling slightly, hovered near her mouth. She was a judge, appointed to serve the law, to be impartial, to protect the structure that upheld a society. But in this moment, she wasn't just a judge. She was Rebecca, the girl from Elmwood Avenue, the friend who once believed the world could be fair if only someone fought hard enough to make it that way. She moved toward the window and stared out at the gray sky. The law demanded consequences. The evidence was clear. Marcus had broken in. He was guilty. But the law also allowed for nuance. There was precedent for alternative sentencing, and more importantly, there was purpose behind the law. Justice wasn't born from punishment alone. It was born from compassion, equity, and a belief in the potential for change. She pressed her fingers into the bridge of her nose. In law school, they taught her that emotion was dangerous, but what they didn't teach her was that emotion, if tempered with reason, could also be a guide. A compass pointing toward the human truth behind the statute. She sat down at her desk, staring at Marcus's file. Criminal record, minor offenses, no history of violence, a primary caregiver to a sick mother until her passing, attempts at employment that fell apart when his record followed him. And then, the break-in, a moment of desperation, not malice. She remembered his face in court, not defiant, not bitter, just tired. Like a man who had fought his whole life and no longer knew how. And then she remembered something deeper. The reason she became a judge. It wasn't for prestige. It wasn't for power. It was for people like Marcus. People who had been failed too many times by a system that didn't always see them fully. When she returned to the courtroom, the silence was profound. Everyone could feel something had shifted. Her robe rustled softly as she approached the bench. Her gavel struck once, cleanly. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear. But there was a warmth in it. A quiet humanity not often heard from. The bench. Mr. Bell, she began, looking directly at him. This court finds you guilty of unlawful entry. A pause. A moment of held breath. However, she continued, due to mitigating circumstances, including your cooperation, your community history, the sincerity of your remorse, and the clear effort you've made to explain and take responsibility for your actions, this court is choosing an alternative to incarceration. The courtroom was still. You are hereby sentenced to a 6-month rehabilitation program, 200 hours of community service, and 2 years of supervised probation. You will be monitored closely, but you will not go to prison. There was an audible gasp from the gallery. Some were shocked. Others looked quietly moved. Marcus stood frozen, eyes wide, then slowly, his lips parted. His face crumpled and tears poured freely. He wasn't a man known for crying, but now, there was no holding it back. Thank you, he whispered, barely able to speak. Judge Thompson gave him a soft nod. Her own eyes shimmered, but she blinked the tears away, refusing to let them fall. Her voice remained the voice of the court. Don't waste this chance, Mr. Bell. You may never get another. He nodded through the tears. I won't. And in that moment, a courtroom became more than a place of judgment. It became a place of hope. Marcus left that day not as a free man, but as a changed one. There were no reporters waiting outside the courthouse. No cheering crowd, just the rustle of leaves in the wind and the heavy thud of the courthouse door closing behind him. But something inside him had shifted. The weight of the chains was gone, replaced by something else, a fragile, flickering hope. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. The road ahead wasn't easy. The rehabilitation program was strict. There were days Marcus wanted to give up. Days he questioned if Judge Thompson had made a mistake believing in him. But every time that doubt crept in, he'd remember her eyes, not filled with pity, but with challenge, with expectation. And he wasn't going to let her down. He threw himself into the program with a determination that surprised even himself. He talked in group sessions, showed up on time every day, and listened when counselors spoke. He stopped making excuses. He started making plans. When the 6 months were over, he didn't return to old habits. He couldn't. He wouldn't. He found work, humble, steady work, at a local shelter, helping sort food donations and clean the facility. He took pride in it, and over time, the staff noticed. They invited him to speak during community outreach events. At first, he was nervous. But then he looked into the eyes of the young men in the audience, the same eyes he used to see in the mirror, and he knew exactly what to say. You think no one sees you, he told them once. But someone will. Someone already might. The question is, will you be ready when they do? Word of Marcus's transformation spread quietly, not in viral videos or online think pieces, but in whispers through neighborhoods, in staff meetings, at youth centers, in quiet, did you hear about conversations at barbershops? Then, one day, a local reporter heard about him through a youth mentor who had attended one of his talks. The story ran under a simple but powerful headline: Judge gives childhood friend a second chance, and he pays it forward. The article featured a photo of Marcus sweeping the floor at the shelter, a shy smile on his face, and a quote from one of the teens he mentored. He talks to us like we matter, like we could be something more. When Rebecca Thompson saw the article, clipped and placed discreetly on her desk by her clerk, she said nothing. She simply read it, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the bottom drawer of her desk, where she kept things that reminded her of why she did this work. She never spoke publicly about the case. No interviews, no social media statements. It wasn't about the attention. But every so often a letter would arrive. Simple envelopes, no return address. Just a first name scrawled across the back, Marcus. Inside she'd find updates, stories. A thank you that never lost its meaning. Judge Thompson. One letter read, yesterday one of the kids I mentored told me he wants to be a lawyer. Said if I could change, maybe he could too. I just wanted you to know. Your faith didn't stop with me. It's growing, reaching others. Thank you for giving me a chance to become the man I should have been a long time ago. She kept every letter, not on display, but in a drawer labeled Legacy. And when her clerks asked her, years later, what the most important ruling of her career was, she never mentioned a landmark case or a high-profile trial. She'd simply smile, tap the side of that drawer and say, sometimes justice isn't about what the law says we should do. It's about what humanity calls us to do. Because sometimes the justice system gets it right. Not by handing down the harshest sentence, but by believing in redemption and being brave enough to extend a second chance. And so in a world often quick to judge and slow to forgive, one decision, one moment of compassion, became a spark that lit a path not just for one man, but for many. Judge Thompson didn't just see a defendant that day. She saw a boy she once knew, a life worth saving, a future still unwritten. And Marcus? He didn't waste the second chance he was given. He turned it into a lifeline for himself and for others like him. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe or carry a gavel. Sometimes it simply listens. If this story moved you even a little, please like, share, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear it. We've got more powerful stories coming. Don't miss them. See you in the next one.